Let's start with ASP Classic, the earliest framework from Microsoft for building web applications. We'll go framework by framework, diving deeply into the concepts, features, and how they functioned, along with their impact. ASP Classic, also known as Active Server Pages, was Microsoft's first framework for building dynamic server-side web applications. It operated on IIS, which stands for Internet Information Services, and was primarily a scripting-based solution that mixed server-side code with HTML. It was designed to make web development simpler for developers familiar with desktop development, but it came with significant limitations. Key concepts and features. Server-side scripting. ASP Classic allowed developers to embed server-side scripts directly into HTML pages using tags. Scripts could be written in VB script, which was the most common, JScript, which was Microsoft's implementation of JavaScript or other scripting languages. For example, would dynamically output Hello World to the browser. Execution flow. The server processed the file before sending the response to the client. Static HTML was sent to the browser as is, while server-side code was executed on the server to generate dynamic content. Built-in objects. ASP Classic provided several built-in objects for common tasks. The request object captured incoming HTTP data like query string parameters, form data, and cookies. For instance, was used to read URL parameters and was used to capture form submissions. The response object controlled the HTTP response sent to the client. You could use to send output to the browser or for URL redirection. The session object stored user-specific data across multiple requests, which was useful for maintaining user state in a stateless HTTP environment. The application object stored data accessible across all users of the application. Lastly, the server object provided utility functions like creating COM objects or URL encoding. File extension and structure. Files were saved with a extension. The server recognized these files as containing executable server-side scripts and processed them through the ASP engine. Dynamic content rendering. Dynamic content generation was its main feature. Developers could retrieve data from databases, process it, and display it within the HTML output. Database connectivity in ASP Classic was handled using ADO, or ActiveX data objects. Developers would write SQL queries directly within their scripts to fetch, insert, or update data. For example, they would use the and objects to connect to a database and retrieve data. Error handling in ASP Classic was, well, quite basic. Developers could use the statement to manage errors, but this approach was often prone to misuse and made debugging a bit of a challenge. When it comes to the limitations of ASP Classic, there were quite a few. Lack of separation of concerns. Server-side code and HTML were tightly coupled, making applications difficult to maintain and scale. There was no concept of MVC or any architectural pattern. Stateless nature. While ASP Classic introduced an objects, maintaining state across multiple requests was challenging and often inefficient. Performance issues. The scripting language, VB script, was interpreted at runtime, leading to slower performance compared to compiled code. Large applications with many concurrent users could overwhelm the single-threaded environment. Security vulnerabilities were, well, a significant concern. A lack of proper input validation mechanisms often led to issues like SQL injection. And, authentication and authorization features were rudimentary, frequently requiring custom implementation. Debugging difficulties were another challenge. It was primarily done using statements or custom logging, which, to be honest, was quite inefficient and error-prone. Scalability challenges were also a big deal. Designed for small to medium-sized applications, ASP Classic struggled with scalability in larger, more complex environments. Why ASP Classic was revolutionary at the time? Simplified web development. ASP Classic reduced the complexity of building dynamic websites compared to older technologies like CGI scripts. It provided developers with built-in objects and methods that streamlined common tasks. Adoption of server-side programming. ASP Classic was one of the early technologies that shifted web development from static HTML to dynamic, server-driven content. Integration with iOS. Tight integration with iOS made deployment straightforward for developers using the Windows platform. Impact on the industry. Lowered the barrier to entry. Developers with a background in VB or desktop development could quickly transition to web development. Widespread adoption. ASP Classic became popular among small and medium businesses due to its simplicity and ease of use. Foundation for modern frameworks. Many concepts introduced in ASP Classic, such as server-side scripting and session management, laid the groundwork for future frameworks. How ASP Classic influenced the evolution to ASP.NET. The limitations of ASP Classic, like lack of separation of concerns, scalability issues, and limited security features, created a demand for a more robust, efficient framework. This demand drove Microsoft to develop ASP.NET, which addressed these shortcomings while introducing modern programming paradigms like object-oriented programming, compiled code, and a structured development model. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll move on to ASP.NET Web Forms to explore how it transformed development and addressed ASP Classic's shortcomings in great detail.